there is a dark part of your brain that enjoys watching others suffer, and you felt it to asterisk. There is a side of the human mind that most people refuse to look at. A shadow hidden behind smiles, morals, and polite behavior. Yet it exists in every society, every era, and sometimes inside ordinary people you would never suspect. The disturbing enjoyment some humans feel when they watch others suffer. This is not always loud cruelty or obvious violence. Sometimes it hides in laughter at humiliation, enjoyment of public shame, obsession with disaster videos, satisfaction in someone else's failure, or silent pleasure when someone we envy falls apart. And what makes this even more unsettling is that many who experience this feeling don't see themselves as cruel at all. They justify it as entertainment, karma, reality, or just curiosity, but psychologically, this pleasure has deep roots inside the brain's reward system, comparison instinct, and survival wiring, because the human brain evolved not just to feel empathy, but also to measure status, power, and advantage. And when another person falls, our subconscious sometimes reads it as proof that we are safer, stronger, or more valuable, triggering small bursts of dopamine similar to winning or being praised. And this is where the dangerous confusion begins. Suffering becomes entertainment, pain becomes content, and real human misery turns into a spectacle that feeds the ego instead of touching the heart. And from ancient public executions to modern viral humiliation clips, history shows that human beings have always gathered around the suffering of others, not only out of fear or warning, but also out of fascination and hidden pleasure. Because watching pain from a safe distance creates a powerful emotional cocktail. Relief that it's not me, superiority that I am above this, and control over emotions we fear in ourselves. And this is why tragedies spread faster than hope, why scandals trend more than kindness, and why negativity feels addictive. Because the brain treats emotional intensity like fuel, and suffering delivers intensity instantly. But what most people never realize is that the pleasure is not coming from the victim's pain. It is coming from the observer's unresolved insecurities, suppressed aggression, and unhealed psychological wounds that finally find a socially acceptable outlet. And this is only the surface of a much deeper and darker mechanism inside the human psyche. From a neurological perspective, the human brain does something unsettling when it observes suffering without direct personal risk. It activates both the empathy network and the reward system at the same time, creating an internal conflict where compassion and pleasure exist together in uncomfortable silence. And this dual activation explains why people can feel guilty yet still keep watching. Because the amygdala responds to emotional intensity. The mirror neurons simulate the experience. But the dopamine system quietly rewards the observer for surviving, feeling dominant, or being entertained. And on social platforms, this mechanism becomes dangerously amplified, turning real pain into digital currency through views, likes, shares, and comments. Where tragedy is no longer just an emotional event, but a performance that feeds algorithms and human cravings simultaneously and socially. We are conditioned from childhood through competition, comparison, and punishment-based reward systems to associate another person's failure with our own success. And over time, the mind learns that watching someone else lose can feel like a personal win even when nothing tangible is gained. And this is why public shaming spreads so fast. Bullying feels powerful to the offender, and reality shows thrive on humiliation, because they activate the primitive dominance instinct buried deep inside the brain. The same instinct that once helped humans survive in hostile environments, but now expresses itself through mockery, gossip, cancel culture, and viral outrage. And what makes this psychologically dangerous is that repeated exposure to others' suffering without responsibility slowly dulls empathy, turning pain into background noise. And when empathy weakens while reward remains, the brain begins to crave suffering not as a moral experience, but as stimulation. And this is the point where people stop seeing victims as humans and begin seeing them as content, reactions, or entertainment assets. And the more detached the observer becomes, the easier it is to justify cruelty with phrases like "they deserve it," "it's their fault," or "it's just the internet." But beneath these justifications lies the same ancient drive for dominance, safety, and emotional control that once ruled survival itself. Psychologically, people who consistently enjoy watching others suffer often display specific internal traits, even if they appear normal on the surface. Chronic insecurity, suppressed resentment, low self-worth, masked by superiority, unresolved trauma, or a deep fear of vulnerability. And when they see someone else in pain, embarrassed, or falling apart, it temporarily lifts their own emotional burden, not because they are happy, but because someone else is hurting more than they are in that moment, creating an artificial sense of relief, power, and emotional escape. And this is why jealousy plays such a central role in sadistic pleasure. When someone we secretly envy fails, the mind feels justified, validated, and less threatened. And in some personalities, this turns into the pleasure derived from another's misfortune, a concept so common that entire cultures have named it, studied it, and normalized it. Yet the truth is darker. Repeated enjoyment of others' pain reshapes emotional wiring, teaching the brain that cruelty equals comfort, that humiliation equals entertainment, and that empathy is optional. And in extreme cases, this pattern escalates into bullying, emotional manipulation, trolling, or even physical harm. Because once the mind learns that pain brings in a reward, it begins to seek stronger doses, just like any other addiction. And what makes this more alarming is that modern society constantly feeds this behavior through news cycles filled with disaster. Social media culture built on public exposure, and entertainment industries that profit from human breakdown, turning psychological suffering into scheduled programming, trending clips, and viral moments. So the line between observer and exploiter slowly disappears, and cruelty becomes not only tolerated but monetized. The most dangerous part of enjoying others' suffering is not what it does to the victim, but what it silently does to the observer's soul. Because every moment of pleasure taken from another person's pain slightly erodes the capacity for compassion, and slowly reshapes the mind into something colder, more detached, and less human. Until one day the same person who laughed at someone else's breakdown finds themselves alone in their own, wondering why no one cares. Because empathy once sacrificed rarely returns easily. And psychologically, the mind always pays a price for the pleasure it steals from cruelty, whether in the form of emotional numbness, relationship breakdown, guilt buried under sarcasm, or a constant thirst for darker stimulation to feel alive. And the truth most people avoid is this: the suffering you enjoy today conditions the suffering you may endure tomorrow. Because the emotional environment you support is the emotional environment you will one day live in. And the real power lies not in dominance through pain, but in the strength to witness suffering without exploiting it, to choose restraint over cruelty, and awareness over instinct. Because when you recognize the dark impulse inside you and refuse to feed it, you reclaim control over your own psychology instead of being ruled by it. And the moment you stop turning pain into entertainment is the moment you stop becoming the kind of human who needs it to feel powerful, superior, or alive. The final and most uncomfortable truth about enjoying others' suffering is not that it exists, but that it grows quietly through repetition until it becomes an identity rather than a reaction. Because the human brain is not only shaped by what it feels, but by what it repeatedly feeds on. And every moment spent consuming humiliation, tragedy, downfall, or pain as entertainment slowly trains the nervous system to associate emotional intensity with worth, attention, and satisfaction, until peace feels boring and kindness feels dull. And this is where the psychological transformation becomes invisible yet permanent. The observer no longer seeks joy. They seek stimulation, and suffering provides the fastest emotional stimulation available. And over time, this rewiring changes how a person interprets the world itself. Neutral events feel empty. Happy moments feel shallow, and only chaos feels real. Only breakdown feels alive. Only destruction feels meaningful. And this is how a society slowly becomes addicted to emotional violence without ever touching physical weapons. Because minds begin to crave what once disturbed them. Scrolling endlessly through disasters, scandals, public breakdowns, and betrayals, not because they enjoy evil, but because their emotional system has forgotten how to feel alive without it. And the most dangerous aspect of this conditioning is that it never announces itself as cruelty. It disguises itself as curiosity, awareness, realism, or even justice. But deep down, it is still the same hunger for emotional domination, where the pain of others becomes the fuel for one's own sense of existence. And psychologically, this state creates a hollow form of power that never satisfies. Because pleasure built on another's suffering requires constant renewal, stronger doses, darker content, deeper humiliation to produce the same effect. Just like any chemical addiction, until the mind becomes emotionally dependent on cruelty without ever realizing it. And this is why people who habitually consume suffering often report feeling empty, restless, irritable, or emotionally numb when they are not stimulated by negativity. Because their emotional baseline has been lowered by repeated exposure to pain-based reward. And ironically, the very people who enjoy watching others break down often become the most fragile internally, because their nervous systems grow hypersensitive to fear, threat, and loss while simultaneously becoming desensitized to compassion, creating a psychological contradiction where they fear suffering intensely in their own lives but casually enjoy it in the lives of others. And this internal split creates chronic anxiety masked as confidence, cynicism masked as intelligence, and emotional detachment masked as strength. And yet beneath all these protective disguises lies the same human vulnerability they refuse to acknowledge in others. Because to witness suffering without exploiting it would require them to confront the very wounds they have been running from through entertainment, mockery, and detachment. And this is why true change in this psychological pattern never begins with moral preaching or public shaming, but with silent self-honesty. The moment a person asks themselves, not why are people so cruel, but why does this content make me feel something? Because that question breaks the illusion that the problem exists only outside, and once that illusion cracks, the mind is forced to face what it has been avoiding, its own hunger for control, its own fear of weakness, its own unresolved pain that seeks relief through comparison instead of healing. And at that point, the observer stands at a psychological crossroads. where they can either continue to feed the dark impulse and become more numb, more detached, more dependent on cruelty for stimulation, or they can begin the far more difficult process of retraining the emotional system to find meaning in connection, growth, restraint, and shared humanity. And this retraining is not instant, because a nervous system conditioned to intensity resists calm, and a mind addicted to spectacle struggles with silence. But with time and conscious effort, the brain can relearn to associate reward with creation instead of destruction, with understanding instead of judgment, with presence instead of voyeurism. And when that shift begins, something radical happens inside the psychology of the observer. The same emotional circuits that once responded to humiliation start responding to resilience. The same curiosity that once hunted tragedy begins searching for depth. And the same attention that once locked onto suffering begins to recognize dignity again. And this is where the true moral power of human psychology reveals itself, not in denying the darkness, but in choosing repeatedly not to live inside it. Because cruelty is easy, it is instant, it is effortless, and it offers immediate emotional stimulation. But compassion is slow, demanding, and often unrewarded in the short term, which is why so few choose it consistently, and yet in the long term. It is the only psychological path that does not hollow the soul, does not poison relationships, and does not trap the mind in an endless cycle of consumption without fulfillment. And the real tragedy is not that some humans enjoy watching others suffer. The real tragedy is that most never realize what that enjoyment quietly steals from their own capacity to feel deeply, love fully, and live with emotional integrity. And the moment a person stops turning pain into entertainment, they do not become weaker, softer, or naive as they fear. They become psychologically free from the invisible addiction that once controlled their attention, their emotions, and silently their character.